Elena Foster had been repeatedly rejected from Westridge Aviation Academy for 2 years, and most days she felt like a ghost, haunting the perimeter fence of the airfield, watching others live her dream. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone who refused to believe that dreams could be stolen by outdated regulations. Her careful calculations and innovative designs were locked away in notebooks that no one had bothered to read, filled with solutions to problems the aviation establishment hadn't even recognized yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rejection letter from Westridge had arrived exactly like the previous 5. Crisp, white envelope, formal letterhead, and the same carefully worded excuse. While we appreciate your enthusiasm for aviation, our admission committee has determined that your application does not meet our current criteria for acceptance. Elena knew what that really meant. In the small, exclusive world of experimental aviation, women were still viewed as outsiders, particularly women without formal engineering degrees or family connections to the industry. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others, refusing to let the disappointment show on her face. Elena worked as a mechanical specialist at Grayson Manufacturing, a position that utilized perhaps 10% of her actual knowledge, but provided access to tools, materials, and technical resources that would prove invaluable. Her colleagues at Grayson viewed her as competent but unremarkable, just another technician who kept her head down and did her job without complaint. What they didn't know was that Elena's modest apartment had been transformed into an aviation design laboratory. The living room walls were covered with technical drawings. The kitchen table supported scale models of innovative wing designs, and her small garage housed components of what was slowly becoming a revolutionary experimental aircraft. For 2 years, she had been meticulously building her dream one piece at a time, using knowledge gleaned from hundreds of books, online forums, and covert observations at Westridge. "You don't have the right background," Director Lawrence had told her during her first rejection interview. "Aviation innovation requires formal training, theoretical foundations, and practical experience that simply isn't available through alternative pathways." He had glanced at her resume: mechanical specialist, self-taught engineer, community college courses, with the kind of dismissive smile that assumed he was being kind rather than condescending. Elena had nodded politely, thanked him for his time, and walked out without argument. Arguments were useless against institutional barriers. Only demonstration could overcome prejudice. So she had begun her private project, determined to build an aircraft that would make conventional training seem irrelevant. Her daily routine had become a carefully orchestrated balance between visible compliance and invisible rebellion. Wake at 5 a.m. 2 hours of design work before her shift at Grayson. 8 hours of mechanical work that paid the bills. Then home to her real work, calculating stress factors, testing materials, adapting conventional designs into something entirely new. Elena slept 4 hours a night, sustained by determination that had hardened into something unbreakable after years of rejection. The key breakthrough had come 6 months earlier while reviewing footage of peregrine falcons in high-speed dives. Conventional aircraft designs prioritize stability and predictable performance, but Elena recognized that true innovation lay in controlled instability, aircraft that could adapt to changing conditions rather than fighting against them. Her design incorporated flexible wing components that could subtly reshape themselves in response to air pressure changes, creating unprecedented maneuverability with minimal power requirements. "It's theoretically impossible," she had overheard Professor Wilson tell a group of Westridge students during a public lecture she had attended. "An aircraft cannot simultaneously maximize fuel efficiency, low-speed stability, and high-altitude performance. Engineering is about acceptable compromises, not magical solutions." Elena had made notes in her worn leather journal, not to record his wisdom, but to identify exactly which impossible problem she would solve next. That evening, she had worked until dawn, developing a variable geometry system that could indeed optimize for different flight parameters without sacrificing overall performance. Her neighbor Marcus, a retired mechanic who occasionally helped with some of the heavier assembly work, often shook his head at her determination. "Elena, I've worked around engines my whole life, and I've never seen anyone as stubborn as you. They're never going to let you into their fancy club, you know." "I don't need their permission to fly, Marcus," she had replied while adjusting a control linkage. "I just need to build something that makes their permission irrelevant." Marcus had watched her work for a moment longer. You know what they'll say, right? Even if you build this thing, even if it flies exactly like you say it will, they'll claim it's unsafe, untested, against regulations. Probably, Elena agreed, but they'll still have to watch it fly. The real setback had come 3 months ago when Elena had finally gathered enough courage to submit her theoretical designs to the Regional Aviation Innovation Conference. Her paper, Adaptive Control Surfaces for Next-Generation Light Aircraft, had been cautiously praised by the review committee, until they discovered the author was a woman without formal credentials. The rejection email had been polite but firm. While your concepts show promise, presentations at RAIC require presenters to hold minimum qualifications of a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering or equivalent field. That evening, Elena had allowed herself exactly 15 minutes of frustrated tears before returning to her garage workshop with renewed determination. If they wouldn't accept her theories, she would give them something impossible to ignore, a working prototype that outperformed anything currently flying in its class. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Working nights and weekends, depleting her modest savings and calling in favors from confused but supportive friends, Elena had transformed her theoretical design into physical reality. The aircraft, taking shape in a rented storage facility on the outskirts of town, didn't look like conventional light aircraft. Its wings incorporated flexible elements that could change their profile in flight. The control systems used a hybrid of mechanical linkages and electronic assists that Elena had designed herself. The lightweight composite fuselage had been built section by section, often with materials borrowed from Grayson's scrap bins or purchased with carefully budgeted overtime pay. "You're not seriously planning to fly that thing yourself, are you?" Marcus had asked when the aircraft finally began to resemble something that might actually leave the ground. "Shouldn't you get, I don't know, a test pilot or something?" Elena had laughed for the first time in weeks. And where exactly would I find a test pilot willing to fly an unproven aircraft built by a woman who's been rejected from flight school 6 times? The truth was that Elena had been preparing for the test flight with the same methodical thoroughness that characterized everything she did. While Westridge Academy had rejected her formal application to their pilot training program, she had found ways to acquire the necessary knowledge. She had logged hundreds of hours on flight simulators, taken private lessons at a small airfield 2 counties over using a different name, and studied every accident report and test flight procedure she could access. Her preparation extended beyond theoretical knowledge. Elena had developed her own training regimen, including physical conditioning focused on G-force tolerance and emergency response. She had built a crude simulator in her apartment that replicated the exact control layout of her aircraft, practicing emergency procedures until they became muscle memory. Every possible failure scenario had been analyzed, with recovery procedures documented in the dog-eared notebook she carried everywhere. The opportunity to prove her capabilities came from an unexpected source. The Western States Disaster Response Commission had issued a public call for innovative solutions to a pressing problem: delivering emergency medical supplies to communities isolated by the recent wildfires that had devastated the mountain regions. Conventional aircraft couldn't operate in the turbulent, smoke-filled conditions, and helicopter operations were limited by fuel capacity and the dangerously unpredictable wind patterns near the fire zones. The Commission was offering a substantial contract to anyone who could demonstrate a viable delivery system. More importantly to Elena, they were focused on results rather than credentials. The request for proposals explicitly stated that solutions will be evaluated solely on demonstrated capabilities, regardless of source. When Elena submitted her proposal, detailing how her aircraft's adaptive control surfaces and unique stability systems were ideally suited for turbulent air conditions, she received an unexpected phone call from Commissioner Danielle Rodriguez. "Ms. Foster, your proposal is unconventional," Rodriguez said, her tone carefully neutral, "but it addresses challenges that none of our other applicants have adequately solved. Are you prepared to demonstrate these capabilities in a practical test?" "Absolutely," Elena replied, her heart racing. "When and where?" "That's the thing," Rodriguez hesitated. "We need this demonstration immediately. 3 communities in the northern mountains have been cut off for 48 hours. Medical supplies are critically low, and weather conditions are deteriorating. Elena glanced at her aircraft, still missing its final inspection and proper registration. How soon do you need this done? Yesterday, Rodriguez answered bluntly. But tomorrow morning will have to do. Can you be at Morton Regional Airfield at 0600? After a brief pause, Elena made the decision that would change everything. I'll be there. The night before the demonstration brought unexpected visitors. Elena was making final adjustments to the fuel system when she heard vehicles approaching the storage facility. Looking up, she saw 3 official cars with the Westridge Aviation Academy logo emblazoned on their doors. Director Lawrence stepped out, flanked by Professor Wilson and the Academy's head of regulatory compliance, Ms. Winters. Their expressions ranged from concerned to openly hostile. Ms. Foster, Lawrence began without preamble, it has come to our attention that you've constructed an unregistered experimental aircraft and intend to operate it without proper certification or oversight. Elena straightened up, wiping her hands on a rag. Good evening, Director. What brings Westridge Academy to my humble workshop? This is not a joke, Ms. Foster, Ms. Winters interjected, holding up a tablet. We've reviewed your submission to the Disaster Response Commission. You're proposing to fly an unproven aircraft design into disaster conditions without any of the required certifications. We've contacted the Commission to inform them of the regulatory violations involved. And what exactly are you hoping to accomplish? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. We're trying to prevent you from killing yourself, Professor Wilson said, with surprising sincerity. And from setting back women in aviation by creating a high-profile disaster. Your intentions may be admirable, but this approach is reckless. Director Lawrence stepped forward, his tone softening slightly. Elena, I understand your frustration with the traditional pathways, but there are reasons these regulations and requirements exist. If your designs have merit, there are proper channels to develop them, with adequate supervision and safety protocols. I tried the proper channels, Elena replied, 6 times. Each time, I was told that my lack of formal credentials made me unsuitable for your programs. Meanwhile, you accepted applicants with half my practical experience because they had the right degree or the right connections. That's not entirely fair, Lawrence began. 3 communities need medical supplies, Elena cut him off. Your proper channels haven't found a solution. I have. We've already spoken with Commissioner Rodriguez, Ms. Winters said. She's withdrawing the consideration of your proposal pending proper certification, which would take months at minimum. Elena felt her dream slipping away, but her expression remained impassive. Then I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. If you'll excuse me, I have work to complete. The Westridge delegation left with mixed expressions of concern, frustration, and, from Professor Wilson, something that might have been reluctant respect. As their cars pulled away, Elena leaned against her aircraft, allowing herself a moment of doubt. Had she been foolish to think she could bypass an entire system designed to exclude outsiders like her? The moment passed quickly. Elena returned to her final preparations with renewed focus. The Westridge officials had revealed something important. They were genuinely worried that she might succeed. That meant her design was sound enough to be taken seriously, even by those determined to dismiss her. Shortly after midnight, Elena's phone rang. Ms. Foster? Danielle Rodriguez here. I wanted to apologize for our earlier conversation. I was pressured to withdraw your proposal from consideration. Elena paused in her work. I understand. Regulatory concerns are important. Yes, they are, Rodriguez agreed. But so are those 3 communities running out of insulin and antibiotics. Off the record, Ms. Foster. Can your aircraft do what you claim? Yes. And can it do it tomorrow? Yes. There was a long pause before Rodriguez spoke again. I'm sending you coordinates for a private airstrip 20 miles east of Morton. Be there at 0500. No official demonstration, no commission observers, no paperwork. Just you, your aircraft, and a delivery that needs to happen. If you succeed, we'll figure out the regulatory details afterward. I'll be there, Elena said. Miss Foster, if you crash that aircraft, I will deny this conversation ever happened. Understood. Elena worked through the night, completing final systems checks and loading the medical supplies that were delivered by an unmarked van shortly after 3 a.m. By 4:30, she was taxiing her aircraft, now designated XF-1 in small letters under the cockpit, out of the storage facility for its first and most important flight. The pre-dawn sky was clear as Elena completed her final checklist. She had no support crew, no chase plane, no emergency response team standing by, just her aircraft, her preparation, and an absolute certainty that this moment would either validate or destroy everything she had worked for. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Elena advanced the throttle and felt the XF-1 respond immediately. The acceleration was smooth, exactly as her calculations had predicted. At precisely 67 knots, she eased back on the control column, and the experimental aircraft lifted off the ground for the first time. The sensation was unlike anything Elena had experienced in conventional aircraft. The XF-1 felt alive beneath her hands, responsive in a way that made previous aircraft seem clumsy by comparison. As she climbed to her initial cruising altitude, she methodically tested each system, confirming that the actual performance matched her theoretical models. When she reached the mountain approaches, the first real test began. Weather reports had warned of severe turbulence and unpredictable wind shears, conditions that had forced other relief flights to turn back. Elena activated the adaptive control system she had designed, feeling the subtle changes as the aircraft adjusted its configuration to the challenging conditions. Where conventional aircraft would have been tossed violently, the XF-1 moved with the air currents rather than fighting them. Elena found herself flying through conditions that should have been impossible, navigating between mountain peaks shrouded in smoke from the wildfires below. The first delivery point came into view, a small community built around a lake, now completely cut off by fire-damaged roads. Elena could see people gathering in the town square as she performed a careful circuit, evaluating options for the supply drop. With no suitable landing area, she would need to use the precision deployment system she had designed, another feature that had drawn skepticism from conventional aviation experts. Reducing speed and activating the deployment controls, Elena positioned the XF-1 exactly 300 feet above the designated drop zone. With surgical precision, the medical supplies descended on a controlled parachute system, landing within 10 feet of the target. Elena allowed herself a brief smile before banking toward the next delivery point. The second community proved more challenging. Surrounded by steep terrain and with visibility reduced by heavy smoke, Elena had to rely on the XF-1's enhanced navigation systems to locate the drop zone. As she maneuvered through a narrow valley, warning indicators flashed, severe downdrafts ahead, potentially exceeding the aircraft's design parameters. A conventional pilot would have aborted, but Elena had prepared for exactly this scenario. She adjusted the XF-1's wing configuration to its most adaptable setting and reduced speed, allowing the aircraft to ride the turbulent air rather than powering through it. The warning indicators remained illuminated but stable as she completed the second delivery with the same precision as the first. The final delivery point was the most isolated, a small research station perched on a ridge that had been completely surrounded by fire for 3 days. As Elena approached, she realized that the situation had deteriorated further. The designated drop zone was now obscured by flames, and communications from the ground indicated that the researchers had been forced to relocate to a precarious position on the north face of the ridge. This would require more than a supply drop. It would demand a landing on terrain that no aircraft should be able to access. Elena studied the ridge through smoke-filtered sunlight, identifying a narrow shelf of relatively flat ground barely 200 feet long. Conventional aircraft would need at least twice that distance, but the XF-1 wasn't conventional. Elena made her decision. After alerting the researchers to clear the area, she configured the XF-1 for its shortest possible landing approach. The aircraft's adaptive systems adjusted automatically as she reduced speed to just above stall, maintaining control authority that would have been impossible with traditional designs. The landing was more controlled collision than textbook touchdown. The XF-1 settled onto the rocky shelf with a jolt that tested every component Elena had built, but the reinforced landing gear absorbed the impact as designed. She brought the aircraft to a stop with less than 20 feet to spare before the shelf dropped away into nothingness. 4 researchers emerged from a makeshift shelter, staring in disbelief at the unconventional aircraft that had appeared on their impossible landing site. Elena quickly transferred the medical supplies and assisted the most injured researcher into the aircraft's single-passenger seat. There would be no room for the others. They would have to wait for a conventional rescue once the fires subsided. "How are you going to take off from here?" the injured researcher asked, eyeing the short, rocky shelf and the sheer drop beyond. "Very carefully," Elena replied, completing her abbreviated pre-flight checks. The takeoff would require everything the XF-1 could deliver. With barely 180 feet of usable space and a significant downdraft off the ridge, conventional flight dynamics said it couldn't be done. But Elena hadn't designed her aircraft according to conventional limits. She advanced the throttle to maximum, feeling the XF-1 strain against the brakes. When the engine reached optimal power, she released the brakes and felt the immediate acceleration. The rough terrain jolted them violently as the aircraft gathered speed, but Elena's focus remained absolute, counting down the diminishing feet of available ground. At precisely the right moment, a moment calculated through hundreds of simulation runs, Elena pulled back on the controls. The XF-1 leapt from the edge of the cliff, dipping slightly as it transitioned from ground effect to free flight. For one heart-stopping second, the aircraft seemed to hover on the edge of a stall. But then the adaptive wings found purchase in the turbulent air, and they were climbing away from the ridge. The return flight to the private airstrip was almost anticlimactic compared to what had come before. Elena landed the XF-1 precisely at the designated time, taxiing to where a small group of officials waited. Among them, she recognized Commissioner Rodriguez, alongside paramedics, who immediately attended to the rescued researcher. What Elena didn't expect to see was Director Lawrence from Westridge Academy, standing slightly apart from the group with an expression that suggested he was re-evaluating several long-held assumptions. As Elena shut down the aircraft systems and climbed out of the cockpit, she maintained the same quiet composure that had carried her through years of rejection and months of solitary work. She handed the mission documentation to Commissioner Rodriguez, who accepted it with a nod that contained more respect than any formal commendation. 3 successful deliveries, 1 extraction. Elena reported simply. All medical supplies deployed intact. All systems performed within design parameters. Ms. Foster, Rodriguez replied, I think we have a lot to discuss about the future of emergency response aircraft. Director Lawrence stepped forward, clearing his throat. Ms. Foster, I believe Westridge Academy and I owe you an apology, and perhaps a conversation about the limitations of our admission criteria. Elena looked at him for a long moment before responding. I'm open to that conversation, Director. But first, I need to complete some maintenance checks on my aircraft. Today was only its first flight, after all. We have a lot more impossible things to accomplish. As she turned back to her aircraft, Elena permitted herself the smallest of smiles. She had never needed their permission to fly. She had only needed to build something that made their permission irrelevant. And in doing so, she had opened a door that would never completely close again. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told that their dreams were impossible because they didn't fit the expected profile. The XF-1 gleamed in the morning sunlight, no longer just an idea in notebooks filled with rejected possibilities, but a physical manifestation of what happens when determination outlasts dismissal. Elena Foster had been banned from flight training, so she built her own aircraft and completed an impossible mission. And in doing so, she had rewritten the rules of what was possible. The consequences of Elena's unauthorized flight arrived swiftly the next morning. While the regional news celebrated an innovative aircraft delivering critical medical supplies, the Federal Aviation Administration launched an immediate investigation. By 9 a.m., 2 stern-faced FAA officials were standing in the makeshift hangar where Elena had returned the XF-1 after its successful mission. Ms. Foster, I'm Inspector Callahan, and this is my colleague, Inspector Reynolds, the older man said, displaying his credentials. We're here regarding multiple violations of federal aviation regulations, including operation of an uncertified experimental aircraft, conducting commercial operations without proper licensing, and entering restricted airspace during emergency conditions. Elena nodded calmly, continuing her post-flight inspection of the XF-1's control surfaces. Good morning, inspectors. I've been expecting you. This is serious, Miss Foster, Reynolds added, tapping her tablet. We're looking at potential fines exceeding $100,000 and possible criminal charges. I understand, Elena replied, straightening up to face them directly. But before we proceed, I should inform you that Commissioner Rodriguez has filed emergency authorization paperwork retroactively approving yesterday's humanitarian mission. You'll find it's all perfectly legal under Section 191, subsection H of the federal regulations covering experimental aircraft used for humanitarian purposes. The inspectors exchanged surprised glances. Callahan frowned. That regulation has rarely been invoked. But it exists. Elena finished for him. "I studied the regulations very thoroughly before undertaking this project. I knew exactly which rules I was bending and which ones had exceptions for precisely this type of situation." Reynolds scrolled through her tablet with obvious frustration. "Even with emergency authorization, this aircraft hasn't undergone proper certification testing. The airworthiness certificate alone requires 200 hours of documented test flights in unpopulated areas," Elena completed again. "I'm well aware. That's why I've already submitted my complete testing plan to your office this morning. The XF-1 won't fly another mission until it meets every single regulatory requirement." The inspectors seemed momentarily lost for words. They had clearly expected to find an amateur enthusiast who had recklessly endangered public safety, not a meticulous professional who knew the regulations better than many FAA employees. "You understand we'll need to impound this aircraft pending investigation," Callahan finally said. "Of course," Elena agreed. "But you should know that Commissioner Rodriguez has already arranged for the investigation to be conducted here, rather than at a government facility. The XF-1's unique systems require specialized maintenance that only I can provide at present." As the inspectors departed to make arrangements for the official impoundment, Elena allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The emergency flight had been a calculated risk, one that could have ended her aviation career before it officially began, but she had prepared for this moment as thoroughly as she had prepared for the flight itself. The real surprise came that afternoon when Professor Wilson from Westridge Academy arrived unannounced. Unlike the previous evening, he came alone, without Director Lawrence or Ms. Winters. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the XF-1. Elena nodded, watching carefully as the professor walked slowly around her aircraft, examining the unconventional control surfaces and adaptive wing design with growing interest. "The flexible trailing edge elements, they're pressure responsive?" he asked, running his fingers lightly along the innovative wing surface. "Pressure and temperature," Elena corrected. "They adjust automatically to changing air density and flow patterns. The system works passively for minor adjustments and actively for major configuration changes." Wilson shook his head with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "We've been theorizing about adaptive control surfaces at Westridge for years. The computational requirements alone were considered prohibitive for an aircraft this size. I developed a hybrid system," Elena explained, surprised to find herself sharing details she had guarded so carefully. "The primary adjustments are mechanical, inspired by bird feathers, actually. The electronic systems only engage for major reconfiguration." For nearly an hour, Elena found herself in the kind of technical discussion she had dreamed of having at Westridge, a genuine exchange of ideas without condescension or skepticism. Professor Wilson asked insightful questions that challenged her design choices while respecting the innovations she had achieved. Finally, he stepped back from the aircraft with a sigh. "Ms. Foster, I owe you an apology. When Director Lawrence showed me your application materials, I was among those who recommended rejection. I believed that meaningful innovation required the structured foundation that formal education provides." Elena remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I was wrong," Wilson admitted. "Not just about you, but about the nature of innovation itself. Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from people who haven't been taught the conventional limitations." Quote, he hesitated before adding, "I'd like to offer you a position as a guest lecturer at Westridge. Our students could learn a great deal from your unconventional approach." The offer was so unexpected that Elena took a moment to process it. "A guest lecturer? Not a student in your program?" Wilson had the grace to look embarrassed. Director Lawrence is reconsidering the admission criteria in light of recent events, but that process will take time. This position would give you immediate access to Westridge resources while the administrative details are sorted out. Elena considered the offer carefully. It represented a significant validation of her work, perhaps the first official recognition she had received from the establishment that had repeatedly rejected her. But it also felt like a half measure, an attempt to incorporate her success without fully acknowledging the flawed system that had excluded her. "I appreciate the offer, Professor Wilson, but I'll need some time to consider it. My focus right now is on completing the FAA certification process for the XF-1. Wilson nodded, understanding the polite deflection. As he turned to leave, he paused. "You know, I'd been teaching aeronautical engineering for 27 years. In all that time, I've never seen anyone teach themselves computational fluid dynamics and materials science from library books. Not just library books, Elena replied with the hint of a smile. YouTube has some excellent resources too. The professor laughed, genuinely this time. Indeed. Well, Miss Foster, regardless of whether you accept our offer, I hope you'll allow me to follow the development of your aircraft. I have a feeling we've only seen the beginning of what it, and you, can accomplish. After Wilson left, Elena returned to her work with renewed energy. The validation felt good, but it wasn't why she had built the XF-1. The real test lay ahead, transforming a successful prototype into a certified aircraft that could change emergency response operations permanently. The next month brought a whirlwind of activity. The FAA established a temporary testing facility at the private airstrip where Elena had landed after her emergency mission. Commissioner Rodriguez, recognizing the potential of Elena's design for disaster response, arranged for financial support through a special innovation grant that allowed Elena to quit her job at Grayson Manufacturing and focus entirely on developing the XF-1. Most surprisingly, 3 former Westridge Academy students who had followed news reports about the impossible rescue flight reached out to volunteer as her technical assistants. Among them was Sophia Reeves, a recent graduate with a master's in aerospace engineering who had grown increasingly frustrated with the conservative approach at traditional aviation companies. I could spend 10 years at North Star Aviation before they'd let me work on anything innovative, Sophia explained during her informal interview in Elena's newly established workshop. What you accomplished with the XF-1 is the kind of engineering I went to school hoping to do. With her small but dedicated team, Elena established a rigorous testing program that exceeded FAA requirements. Each test flight expanded the XF-1's operational envelope while documenting its unique capabilities. The adaptive control systems proved even more effective than Elena's original calculations had predicted, allowing the aircraft to operate safely in conditions that would ground conventional designs. Director Lawrence made several attempts to bring Elena into the Westridge fold, each offer more generous than the last. Guest lecturer became visiting scholar, then researcher in residence with access to the Academy's advanced wind tunnel facilities. Elena accepted limited collaboration while maintaining her independence, allowing Westridge students to observe testing procedures in exchange for access to specialized equipment. The real breakthrough came 6 weeks into the testing program, when the XF-1 encountered severe microbursts during a high-altitude stability test. Conventional aircraft would have been thrown into potentially unrecoverable attitudes, but the XF-1's adaptive systems responded instantly to the changing air pressure, maintaining controlled flight through conditions that would typically trigger emergency warnings. Test pilot Marcus Davis, a retired Air Force veteran who had initially been skeptical of Elena's unconventional design, landed the aircraft with an expression of stunned disbelief. "I've been flying experimental aircraft for 22 years, he told Elena as he climbed out of the cockpit. What just happened up there should have been impossible. The aircraft didn't just survive those conditions. It handled them like they were minor turbulence. Video footage from the test flight quickly made its way through aviation circles. Within days, Elena received inquiries from 3 major aerospace companies and 2 government agencies, all expressing interest in her adaptive control technology. The corporate offers were tempting: substantial development budgets, state-of-the-art facilities, and salaries that made Elena's innovation grant look like pocket change. But each came with conditions that would effectively transfer control of her technology to companies with priorities very different from her original vision. North Star is offering $8 million for the patents alone, Sophia mentioned as they reviewed the latest test data. That's life-changing money, Elena. It is, Elena agreed. But they'd shelve the humanitarian applications in favor of military contracts. That's not why I built the XF-1. The most unexpected offer came from Commissioner Rodriguez, who arrived at the testing facility unannounced one afternoon as Elena was reviewing design modifications for the XF-1's second iteration. Ms. Foster, the Disaster Response Commission is establishing a dedicated Rapid Innovation Division, Rodriguez explained, spreading official-looking documents across Elena's cluttered desk. We want you to lead it. Elena studied the proposal with careful attention. Unlike the corporate offers, this one would allow her to maintain control of her technology while developing it specifically for humanitarian applications. The budget was smaller, but the autonomy was complete. You'd have full authority to assemble your team and establish development priorities, Rodriguez continued. The Commission is prepared to fast-track certification for emergency response variants while you continue refining the technology. What about Westridge? Elena asked. They've been pushing hard to incorporate my work into their research programs. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. Actually, we're proposing a collaborative framework. Westridge would provide technical support and testing facilities, but you would retain independent operational control. Director Lawrence has already indicated preliminary approval. The arrangement was elegant, offering Elena the resources she needed while allowing Westridge to participate without controlling the direction of her work. It represented a fundamental shift in how the aviation establishment viewed her. No longer an outsider to be excluded, but an innovator whose unorthodox approach had proven its value. I'll need to review the details, Elena said, unwilling to commit without understanding every aspect of the proposal. And I'd want my current team included in any transition. Of course, Rodriguez agreed. Take whatever time you need. But there's one more thing you should know. She hesitated briefly. 3 more communities in the eastern mountains have been cut off by flooding. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and conventional aircraft can't reach them. We need the XF-1. Elena felt a familiar tension between opportunity and caution. The testing program had been rigorous, but the aircraft had not yet received its final certification. Using it for another emergency mission would mean once again operating in a regulatory gray area. The FAA, she began, has issued a temporary emergency certification, Rodriguez finished, producing another document. Inspector Callahan signed it himself this morning. The XF-1 is cleared for humanitarian operations under your command. The realization struck Elena suddenly. Her position had fundamentally changed. The system that had once automatically excluded her was now creating special accommodations to include her. The rules that had been barriers were being reinterpreted as gateways. When do we depart? She asked, already mentally preparing the pre-flight checklist. Tomorrow at dawn, Rodriguez replied. 3 communities, 6 delivery points, conditions similar to your first mission, but with heavy rain instead of smoke. Can the XF-1 handle it? Yes, Elena said with quiet certainty. It was designed for exactly these conditions. As Rodriguez left to make arrangements, Sophia approached with an expression of concern. Elena, are you sure about this? We've made modifications to the control systems that haven't been fully tested in extreme weather. The simulations show improved performance, Elena replied, already pulling up the weather data for the affected region. And sometimes you have to trust your design to do what you built it to do. Sophia studied her for a moment before nodding. I'll prep the supply modules and update the navigation database with the latest terrain information. Throughout the evening, Elena's small team worked with focused intensity to prepare the XF-1 for its second emergency mission. The aircraft had evolved significantly since its first flight: enhanced systems, refined controls, improved payload capacity, but its fundamental purpose remained unchanged, reaching the unreachable when lives depended on it. As midnight approached, Elena was completing her final checks when she noticed a figure watching from the hangar entrance. Director Lawrence stood observing in silence, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Director, Elena acknowledged, continuing her work. It's a bit late for a social call. Not social, Lawrence replied, approaching slowly. Professional. I wanted to see for myself what we missed. He gestured toward the XF-1. 6 rejections. That's how many times we turned you away from Westridge. Elena remained focused on her checklist. 7, actually. You forgot the preliminary application I submitted 2 years before the formal ones. Lawrence winced visibly. 7. And yet here we are, Westridge Academy, entering into a formal partnership with the very person we repeatedly deemed unqualified. Ironic, Elena agreed without emotion, but I'm more interested in tomorrow's mission than yesterday's rejections. Of course. Lawrence watched her methodical preparation for a moment longer before speaking again. I've been reviewing our admission policies, Ms. Foster. The patterns of exclusion go deeper than I realized. It's not just gender. It's background, approach, perspective. We've been systematically filtering for people who think like us, rather than people who might challenge our assumptions. Elena paused her work, finally giving him her full attention. That's a significant realization, Director. Indeed. And an uncomfortable one. Which is why I'm here. He handed her a folder. This is our proposed revision to Westridge's admission criteria. Before we implement it, I'd value your perspective as someone who experienced the flaws in our current system firsthand. The gesture was unexpected, a tacit acknowledgement that her experience had value precisely because it differed from the institutional norm. Elena accepted the folder with a nod of appreciation. I'll review it after tomorrow's mission, she promised. Though I should warn you, I'm not known for holding back my opinions. That's exactly why I'm asking, Lawrence replied with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Safe flying tomorrow, Miss Foster. There are people counting on your impossible aircraft. After he left, Elena returned to her preparations with renewed focus. The external validation, from Professor Wilson, Commissioner Rodriguez, even Director Lawrence, felt satisfying but ultimately secondary to the work itself. She had built the XF-1 not to prove others wrong, but to solve problems they couldn't solve with conventional approaches. As dawn approached, Elena completed her final systems check and began the pre-flight procedure. Weather reports confirmed what Rodriguez had told her: severe conditions throughout the mountain region, with heavy rain and strong wind shears creating impossible flying conditions for conventional aircraft. 3 communities isolated by rising floodwaters, medical supplies running critically low, and no viable alternatives for delivery. Sophia arrived with the final payload manifest. Everything's loaded and secured. The medical packages are waterproofed for deployment in heavy rain, and I've programmed the drop coordinates into the navigation system. Thank you, Elena said, reviewing the information. You've been invaluable these past weeks. Just doing my job, Sophia replied with a smile that acknowledged the understated praise. Though I'm still getting used to working for someone who builds impossible aircraft in storage units instead of someone with an impressive title and corner office. Elena allowed herself a small laugh as she climbed into the cockpit. Impressive titles are overrated. Building something that works when nothing else will. That's the only credential that really matters. As the XF-1's engines hummed to life, Elena felt the familiar sense of focused calm that had carried her through years of rejection and months of solitary work. The system that had once excluded her was now counting on her to accomplish what conventional approaches couldn't. The rules that had been used to block her path were now being rewritten to accommodate her innovation. But as she guided the XF-1 into the pre-dawn sky, Elena knew that external validation had never been her true goal. She had built this aircraft to solve problems that mattered, to reach people when they needed help most, to transform impossible from a barrier into simply another engineering challenge to overcome. The storm front loomed ahead, dark and forbidding in the early morning light. Conventional aircraft would turn back, declaring the conditions unsafe. But the XF-1 wasn't conventional, and neither was its creator. Elena adjusted her course directly toward the storm, prepared to once again demonstrate what becomes possible when determination outlasts rejection. The first raindrops hit the windscreen as Elena guided the XF-1 toward the mountain range. What had appeared as distant darkness from the airfield now revealed itself as a wall of water and wind that seemed to dare any aircraft to enter. Conventional weather radar painted the entire region in alarming shades of red and purple, warning of conditions that would typically ground all flights. Elena activated the XF-1's specialized weather mapping system, one of the innovations she had implemented during the testing program. Unlike standard radar, her system analyzed micropatterns within the larger storm, identifying potential corridors of relatively stable air that remained invisible to conventional instruments. The display revealed what she had expected. While the storm appeared uniformly dangerous to standard aircraft, the XF-1 could navigate through specific areas where its adaptive capabilities would provide adequate safety margins. Control, this is XF-1, Elena transmitted. Beginning approach to weather system. Activating adaptive configuration for heavy precipitation. Copy XF-1, responded the monitoring station where Sophia and the rest of Elena's team tracked the mission. Be advised, Conditions are deteriorating faster than predicted. Wind shears exceeding 50 knots reported at all altitudes. Understood. Proceeding as planned. As the XF-1 entered the outer bands of the storm, Elena felt the aircraft respond instantly to the changing conditions. The flexible wing elements adjusted automatically to the turbulent air, while the electronic systems made micro-corrections faster than any human pilot could implement. Where a conventional aircraft would have been tossed violently, the XF-1 moved with a controlled fluidity that almost made it feel like part of the storm rather than something fighting against it. Rain lashed against the windscreen with increasing intensity, reducing visibility to near zero. Elena switched to the enhanced navigation system that combined terrain mapping with acoustic sensing, another innovation born from her years of study outside traditional aviation channels. The system created a real-time model of the surrounding environment by analyzing how sound waves interacted with terrain and precipitation, allowing her to see through conditions that would blind ordinary aircraft. The first delivery target appeared on her navigation display, a small community built along a river that had now become a raging torrent. Elena could see emergency shelters established on higher ground, but the floodwaters had cut off road access entirely. Dropping to a lower altitude, she activated the precision delivery system and positioned the XF-1 for the supply drop. Package 1 away, she confirmed, as the medical supplies descended on their controlled parachute. Through the specialized imaging system, she watched the package land precisely in the designated zone, immediately retrieved by waiting emergency personnel. As Elena banked toward the second target, warning indicators flashed across her display. A massive downdraft had formed directly in her path, the kind of sudden, violent air movement that had claimed numerous aircraft over the years. Conventional procedure would demand an immediate course change to avoid the hazard entirely. Instead, Elena adjusted the XF-1's configuration to its most adaptive setting and transmitted, "Control, encountering severe downdraft. Implementing vertical transit protocol." "Vertical transit," came the concerned response. "Elena, that procedure hasn't been fully tested in actual conditions." "It's tested now," Elena replied calmly, guiding the XF-1 directly into the downdraft. What happened next would later be described by aviation experts as aerodynamically impossible. Rather than fighting the powerful downward air movement, the XF-1's adaptive systems reconfigured to essentially ride the downdraft like a controlled descent. The aircraft's wings shifted to a configuration that maintained stable flight despite vertical airspeeds that would have sent conventional designs into unrecoverable dives. Elena felt the familiar sense of focused calm as she monitored the systems. This was exactly the kind of situation she had designed the XF-1 to handle, conditions that existing aircraft categorized as impossible rather than merely difficult. The downdraft carried the XF-1 nearly 2,000 feet lower in less than 30 seconds, but the descent remained completely controlled. As the aircraft transitioned back to level flight, Elena heard an unexpected voice over the radio. "XF-1, this is Director Lawrence. I'm observing your telemetry data from the control center. Did you just deliberately enter a severe downdraft?" "Affirmative," Elena replied. "It was the most efficient route to the second delivery point. The XF-1 handled it within operational parameters." There was a brief pause before Lawrence responded. "I've been flying for 30 years, Ms. Foster. What you just did violates everything we teach about severe weather avoidance." "With respect, Director, that's because you're teaching pilots to fly conventional aircraft with conventional limitations. The XF-1 doesn't share those limitations. The second delivery proved more challenging than the first. The community was situated in a narrow valley now partially flooded, with no clear drop zones available. Elena would need to descend to dangerously low altitude to deliver the supplies with sufficient precision. Reducing speed and activating the enhanced terrain mapping, Elena guided the XF-1 through the valley at just 200 feet above the surging floodwaters. Rain continued to pound the aircraft as wind gusts created unpredictable turbulence between the valley walls. The proximity to terrain would have made this approach suicidal in a conventional aircraft, but the XF-1's systems provided continuous micro-adjustments that maintained a safe flight path despite the chaotic conditions. "Package 2 away," Elena confirmed as the second delivery descended to the waiting emergency responders. Proceeding to final target. The third community presented an entirely different challenge. Situated on a mountain plateau, it had been cut off when landslides destroyed the only access road. More critically, The plateau itself was now threatened by further landslides as the heavy rains continued to destabilize the surrounding terrain. As Elena approached, she received an urgent update from Control. XF1. New information from emergency services. The situation at Target 3 has deteriorated. They're requesting immediate evacuation of critical medical patients. 5 individuals requiring urgent hospital care. Elena processed this information quickly. The XF-1 had been designed primarily for supply delivery, not passenger transport. While the aircraft technically had space for passengers, it would require reconfiguration and would significantly impact flight characteristics, especially in these weather conditions. Understood, Control. I'll need to land and reconfigure. Please advise emergency services to prepare patients for immediate transport. Elena, Sophia's voice came through with obvious concern. The plateau landing zone is reporting surface winds gusting to 45 knots with severe turbulence. Conditions are well outside safe landing parameters. Elena checked her weather display, confirming Sophia's assessment. By conventional standards, attempting to land in these conditions would be reckless. Even with the XF-1's advanced capabilities, it would push the aircraft to its limits. I understand the risks, Elena replied, but those patients don't have other options. I'm proceeding with the landing approach. As the XF-1 descended toward the plateau, the full fury of the storm became apparent. Wind gusts slammed into the aircraft from unpredictable directions, while sheets of rain reduced visibility to mere yards. The landing zone itself, a small clearing near the community center, was barely larger than the XF-1's minimum landing requirement. Elena activated all adaptive systems and began the most challenging landing of her career. The XF-1 fought against the turbulent air, its wings constantly reconfiguring to maintain stability, as Elena guided it toward the tiny landing zone. Proximity warnings blared as gusting winds pushed the aircraft dangerously close to surrounding obstacles. With a final adjustment that tested both the aircraft's capabilities and her own skill, Elena brought the XF-1 down onto the rain-soaked clearing. The landing was harder than ideal, sending a shudder through the airframe that made her momentarily question whether she had pushed too far. A quick systems check confirmed the aircraft remained fully operational. Elena implemented the rapid reconfiguration protocol, transforming the cargo area into emergency medical transport configuration, while medical personnel rushed 5 critical patients through the downpour toward the waiting aircraft. Control, this is XF-1, landed at Target 3. Reconfiguring for medical evacuation. 5 patients incoming. Copy that, came the relieved response. Regional Medical Center has been notified and is preparing to receive patients. Be advised, weather conditions are still deteriorating. Recommend expedited departure. The urgency of the situation became even clearer as Elena helped load the patients. 2 elderly individuals with critical cardiac conditions, a pregnant woman with severe preeclampsia, a teenager with appendicitis, and a child with a serious respiratory infection, all requiring immediate hospital care that the isolated community could no longer provide. As the final patient was secured, a community doctor climbed partially into the aircraft. The nearest hospital is 80 miles away, she shouted over the storm. In these conditions... We'll make it, Elena interrupted with quiet certainty. I designed this aircraft for exactly this situation. The doctor studied Elena's face for a moment before nodding and stepping back. Thank you for coming when no one else would. The takeoff would be even more challenging than the landing. The continuing rain had further saturated the already soft ground, while wind conditions had deteriorated further. Elena completed her abbreviated pre-flight checks with methodical precision, calculating power requirements and takeoff distance with no margin for error. XF-1 to Control. Preparing for departure with 5 medical evacuees on board. Be advised, aircraft performance will be affected by passenger configuration and weather conditions. Understood, XF-1. We're tracking multiple weather cells between your position and home base. Regional Medical Center has cleared their emergency helipad for your arrival. With patients secured and systems configured for maximum performance, Elena advanced the throttle and felt the XF-1 respond. The waterlogged ground created additional drag, requiring more power than normal takeoff procedures. The aircraft accelerated more slowly than ideal, eating up precious feet of the limited runway. Just as the XF-1 approached takeoff speed, a violent crosswind gust slammed into the aircraft, pushing it toward the edge of the clearing where a steep drop-off awaited. Conventional control inputs would have been insufficient to counter the sudden force, but the XF-1's adaptive systems responded instantly, reconfiguring the wing on the affected side to generate additional counterforce. Elena felt the aircraft respond and maintained her takeoff path. At precisely the calculated point, she rotated, feeling the XF-1 break free from the ground effect and begin its climb away from the plateau. The maneuver had consumed every foot of available space, with no room for error or hesitation. XF-1 airborne with 5 medical evacuees, she reported. Estimated arrival at Regional Medical Center in 35 minutes. The return journey presented different challenges than the outbound flight. With passengers on board, Elena needed to prioritize stability over the more aggressive maneuvering she had employed earlier. Additionally, the XF-1's performance envelope was more constrained with the additional weight and altered center of gravity. Yet even with these limitations, the aircraft demonstrated capabilities far beyond conventional designs. As Elena navigated through the heart of the storm system, the XF-1's adaptive features maintained a level of stability that kept the medical patients secure while finding efficient paths through the turbulent air. 20 minutes into the return flight, a new challenge emerged. The primary weather cell had intensified and shifted position, placing it directly between the XF-1 and the regional medical center. Conventional aircraft would be forced to divert hundreds of miles to avoid the dangerous conditions, potentially delaying medical care beyond the critical window for some of the patients. Elena studied her weather display, identifying a narrow corridor through the cell that conventional instruments would have missed entirely. The passage would require precise navigation through extremely turbulent conditions, but it offered a direct path to the medical center. Control, this is XF-1. I'm identifying a transit corridor through the primary cell, requesting clearance to proceed on direct route to Regional Medical Center. There was a pause before Sophia's concerned voice responded. Elena, our systems don't show any viable corridor. Satellite imagery shows extreme conditions throughout that entire sector. Your systems are designed to assess conditions for conventional aircraft, Elena explained. The XF-1 can safely navigate passages that would be invisible to standard instruments. Trust me, Sophia. It's there, and we can make it through. After another pause, a different voice came through. Inspector Callahan from the FAA. Ms. Foster, this is Callahan. I'm observing your operation under the Emergency Certification Protocol. The corridor you're proposing doesn't exist according to all standard weather assessment criteria. With respect, Inspector, standard criteria don't apply to the XF-1. I have 5 critical patients on board who need immediate medical attention. I can deliver them safely by proceeding directly through the corridor I've identified. And if you're wrong? Callahan challenged. I'm not, Elena replied with the quiet confidence that came from absolute certainty in her design. But the decision is yours. Direct route through the corridor will deliver these patients to medical care in approximately 15 minutes. Standard diversion will add at least 40 minutes to our arrival time. The implications were clear. For at least some of the patients, that 40-minute difference could be critical. Elena waited, maintaining her course toward the approaching weather cell while awaiting the official decision. Finally, Callahan's voice returned. XF-1, you are cleared to proceed at your discretion. Be advised this decision is being documented as a test of experimental capability under emergency conditions. Understood, Elena acknowledged, already adjusting her course to align with the narrow corridor she had identified. As the XF-1 entered the heart of the storm cell, conditions deteriorated beyond anything Elena had yet encountered. The aircraft was buffeted by winds exceeding 60 knots, while rain so heavy it seemed solid reduced visibility to 0. Lightning flashed around them, creating momentary electrical disturbances that briefly affected some of the XF-1's electronic systems. Yet, through it all, the aircraft performed exactly as Elena had designed it to. The adaptive wings continuously reconfigured to maintain stability in the chaotic air currents. The hybrid navigation system created a real-time model of their surroundings despite the zero visibility conditions. The specialized power management system ensured critical functions remained operational, even when momentary electrical surges threatened to disrupt them. Elena guided the XF-1 through the narrow corridor with unwavering focus, making micro-adjustments based on the aircraft's feedback and her own intuitive understanding of how her creation moved through turbulent air. What conventional pilots would have considered impossible, she navigated as though it were simply another challenging flight path. 12 minutes later, the XF-1 emerged from the other side of the weather cell, the regional medical center now visible in the near distance. Elena had successfully traversed conditions that would have forced any other aircraft to divert, potentially saving lives through the capabilities she had built into her impossible design. Control. XF-1 clear of weather cell on final approach to regional medical center. Request priority landing clearance for medical emergency. XF-1, you are cleared for immediate approach to the emergency helipad, came the prompt response. Medical teams are standing by to receive patients. As Elena guided the XF-1 toward the hospital's landing facility, she became aware of something unexpected. A gathered crowd of medical personnel, hospital staff, and local media watching her approach. Word had spread about the impossible rescue flight through conditions that had grounded all other aircraft, and people had gathered to witness what many had deemed impossible. The landing was precise and controlled, a stark contrast to the challenging conditions Elena had navigated to reach this point. As medical teams rushed forward to transfer the patients, she conducted a rapid shutdown procedure and emerged from the cockpit to assist with the evacuations. A hospital administrator approached as the patients were being wheeled rapidly into the emergency department. Ms. Foster, Dr. Reynolds, Chief of Emergency Services. What you just accomplished is, well, I've been told it should have been impossible. Elena nodded acknowledgement while continuing to help with the final patient transfer. The XF-1 was designed to redefine what's possible in emergency response situations. How are the patients? All stable, Dr. Reynolds confirmed. That pregnant woman was within hours of a life-threatening crisis. The elderly gentleman with the cardiac condition was deteriorating rapidly. If they'd had to wait for the storm to clear. She didn't need to finish the sentence. As the final patient was rushed inside, Elena became aware of the gathered media representatives approaching with cameras and recorders. Before they could reach her, an unexpected figure intervened, Commissioner Rodriguez, who had apparently been monitoring the situation from the hospital. Ms. Foster will provide a full briefing after she has completed her post-flight procedures, Rodriguez announced firmly, creating a barrier between Elena and the press. This was an official Disaster Response Commission operation utilizing experimental capabilities under emergency authorization. Elena shot Rodriguez a grateful look as she turned back toward the XF-1 to begin her standard post-flight inspection. Despite the media attention and the dramatic nature of the rescue, her priority remained the aircraft itself, ensuring that the systems had performed as designed and identifying any adjustments needed for future operations. As she conducted her inspection, Elena was joined by an unexpected visitor. Inspector Callahan approached with an expression that combined professional assessment with poorly concealed amazement. Ms. Foster, he began formally, I need to conduct an immediate operational review of this flight under the emergency certification protocols. Elena nodded, continuing her inspection. Of course, Inspector. My systems recorded full telemetry data throughout the mission. You'll have complete access. Callahan watched her methodical work for a moment before his formal demeanor cracked slightly. I've been with the FAA for 23 years, Miss Foster. I've certified experimental aircraft, prototype systems, and emergency procedures that push the boundaries of what we considered possible. What you just did. He paused, searching for the right words. You didn't just bend the rules of aviation, you rewrote them entirely. Elena looked up from her inspection, meeting his gaze directly. The rules were written for aircraft with fixed limitations, Inspector. The XF-1 simply doesn't share those limitations. Clearly, Callahan agreed, a hint of respect creeping into his voice, which presents us with an interesting regulatory challenge. How do we certify an aircraft that can safely operate in conditions our regulations define as categorically unsafe? Elena allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps the regulations need to evolve along with the technology. Perhaps they do, Callahan conceded. I'll be recommending an expedited final certification process for the XF-1 with special classification for its unique capabilities. The data from today's operation makes a compelling case that some of our fundamental assumptions about aircraft limitations need to be reconsidered. As Callahan departed to begin his report, Elena completed her inspection and found Commissioner Rodriguez waiting nearby, now joined by Director Lawrence and Professor Wilson from Westridge Academy. Their expression suggested they had witnessed something that had forced them to reconsider long-held beliefs about what was possible. 5 lives saved today, Rodriguez stated simply. 5 people who would have had no other options if not for your impossible aircraft. Elena nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with personal praise, but deeply satisfied with the XF-1's performance. The aircraft performed exactly as designed. The weather corridor was precisely where my calculations predicted it would be. Your calculations, Professor Wilson repeated with a shake of his head. Based on theories that contradict what we've been teaching for decades about severe weather avoidance. Not contradict, Elena corrected. Expand. Conventional aircraft should absolutely avoid those conditions. The XF-1 simply has different operational parameters. Director Lawrence stepped forward, his expression more humble than Elena had ever seen it. Ms. Foster, I believe we need to completely reassess our approach to innovation at Westridge. Your success challenges not just our technical assumptions, but our entire philosophy of aviation development. Elena regarded the 3 officials thoughtfully. In their different ways, each represented institutions that had initially dismissed her capabilities or restricted her opportunities. Now they stood before her, forced to reconsider their fundamental assumptions because she had accomplished what their systems had deemed impossible. The XF-1 isn't the endpoint, she told them. It's just the beginning of what becomes possible when we stop accepting conventional limitations as absolute barriers. There are countless other impossible problems waiting to be solved by people your systems might currently be excluding. As the group discussed the implications of the day's mission, Elena glanced back at her aircraft gleaming in the emergency lights of the hospital helipad. The XF-1 represented more than just an innovative design or a successful rescue mission. It embodied a fundamental truth that she had carried through years of rejection and doubt. The most meaningful innovations often come from those who refuse to accept that current limitations define future possibilities. She had been banned from flight training, so she built her own aircraft and completed an impossible mission. And in doing so, she had opened a door not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told that their dreams were impossible because they didn't fit someone else's definition of qualified. 6 months after the flood rescue mission, Elena Foster stood at the edge of the newly completed test facility, watching 3 XF-1 variants take to the sky in perfect formation. What had begun as a solitary project built in a storage unit had evolved into something far beyond her original vision. Not just an innovative aircraft, but a complete reimagining of what was possible in emergency response aviation. The Rapid Innovation Division that Commissioner Rodriguez had proposed was now a reality, with Elena serving as its director. The sprawling facility combined cutting-edge testing capabilities with practical training programs, all focused on a single mission: developing aircraft that could reach people when conventional approaches failed. Pretty impressive view, remarked Sophia, who had become Elena's chief engineer and second-in-command. Hard to believe this all started with hand-drawn designs in your apartment. Elena nodded, watching as the lead aircraft executed a maneuver that would have been considered aerodynamically impossible just a year earlier. Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back in that storage unit, trying to convince myself that the whole project wasn't completely insane. Instead, you've got 30 engineers working for you, a partnership with Westridge Academy, and the FAA creating an entirely new certification category because of your designs. Sophia gestured toward the administrative building, where representatives from 3 government agencies were meeting to discuss expanded applications for the adaptive technology. Not bad for someone who was repeatedly deemed unqualified. The journey from rejected applicant to respected innovator had not been without challenges. The success of the XF-1 had initially created as many problems as opportunities: regulatory hurdles, competing commercial interests, and the difficult transition from individual creator to organizational leader. Elena had navigated these challenges with the same methodical determination that had characterized her original project, refusing to compromise her vision even when easier paths presented themselves. Major aerospace companies had offered substantial sums for the patents, promising to, quote, fully develop the technology, while offering Elena prestigious positions that would have provided wealth and recognition. She had declined them all, recognizing that commercial priorities would inevitably shift the focus away from the humanitarian applications that had inspired her work from the beginning. Instead, she had structured the Rapid Innovation Division as a public-private partnership that maintained her control over how the technology was deployed. The commercial applications funded the continued development of emergency response variants, creating a sustainable model that preserved the original mission while allowing the innovation to expand into new areas. Director Foster? A young woman in a Westridge Academy uniform approached, tablet in hand. Professor Wilson asked me to inform you that the simulation results are ready for review. The high-altitude adaptive system is showing promising results. Thank you, Cadet Taylor, Elena replied. Please tell the professor I'll join him shortly. As the cadet departed, Sophia raised an eyebrow. Westridge Academy sending their students to you as messengers now? That's quite a reversal. Melissa Taylor isn't just any student, Elena explained. She's part of their new unconventional innovation program, specifically created for candidates who don't fit traditional admission profiles. Brilliant mechanical intuition but struggled with theoretical exams. Westridge would have rejected her outright under their old criteria. The transformation at Westridge Academy had been among the most surprising outcomes of Elena's success. Director Lawrence had not only revised the admission criteria as promised, but had fundamentally restructured the institution's approach to innovation. The Academy now actively sought out students who demonstrated creative problem-solving and practical skills, regardless of their formal qualifications or traditional academic performance. Director Foster, called a familiar voice. Marcus, Elena's former neighbor who had helped with the original XF-1 assembly, approached with a wide grin. Now officially employed as the division's chief of practical applications, the retired mechanic brought decades of hands-on experience that complemented the theoretical knowledge of the younger engineers. The modified control system for the search and rescue variant is performing beautifully, he reported. Maintained stable flight in wind tunnel conditions that would tear conventional aircraft apart. I think we're ready for actual weather testing next week. Elena nodded appreciation. Excellent work, Marcus. Make sure the test pilots are thoroughly briefed on the behavioral differences from the standard model. As Marcus departed to complete the preparations, Elena turned her attention back to the aircraft still performing evaluation flights overhead. The lead XF-1, piloted by former Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reeves, executed a series of maneuvers specifically designed to demonstrate the adaptive system's capabilities in rapidly changing conditions. Reeves had joined the program 3 months earlier after a distinguished military career that had ended abruptly when she questioned the safety protocols that prioritized equipment preservation over rescue capabilities. Her experience with conventional rescue operations provided valuable insight into how the XF-1's unique capabilities could be most effectively deployed in real-world scenarios. You know what still amazes me? Sophia mused, watching the aircraft perform maneuvers that defied conventional aerodynamics. Not just that you built an impossible aircraft, but that you forced an entire industry to reconsider what impossible actually means. Before Elena could respond, her communication device signaled an incoming priority message. Foster, she answered. Director, this is Central Coordination. The voice belonged to Rodriguez, who now oversaw emergency response operations for the entire region. We have a developing situation in the western mountain range. Avalanche has cut off access to Silverton Research Station. They're reporting 3 injured personnel requiring immediate evacuation, but weather conditions are extreme. Category 5 winter storm with whiteout conditions and wind gusts exceeding 75 knots. Elena was already moving toward the operations center, Sophia falling in step beside her. What's the status of conventional rescue options? All grounded, Rodriguez replied grimly. National Guard attempted an approach with their most advanced helicopter, but had to abort at 10 miles out. Conditions exceed safe operational parameters for all standard aircraft. But not for the XF-1, Elena stated rather than asked. That's the assessment, Rodriguez confirmed. The injured researchers include Dr. Abigail Chen, whose work on climate pattern prediction is critically important. Time is a factor. Medical assessment indicates her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Understood. I'll coordinate the mission personally. Please transmit all available data to our operations center. As Elena entered the facility's command center, the atmosphere immediately shifted from routine testing to focused emergency response. Screens displayed weather data, terrain mapping, and the latest information from the research station. Engineers and support personnel moved with practiced efficiency, preparing systems and analyzing conditions. XF-1 Rescue 3 is being prepared for immediate deployment, reported the operations manager. Estimated time to launch is 30 minutes. Elena studied the weather data with focused attention. The conditions were beyond extreme. A perfect winter storm with elements that would challenge even the XF-1's advanced capabilities. This would be the most severe test yet of the aircraft's design principles and adaptive systems. "I'll pilot this mission," she announced, already moving toward the preparation area. "Director," Sophia objected, following quickly. "We have 3 qualified test pilots on standby who are specifically trained for rescue operations, none of whom have my experience with the XF-1's behavior in extreme conditions," Elena countered. "This mission will push the aircraft beyond anything we've tested in actual operational environments. I need to be there to assess performance and make real-time adjustments if necessary." Sophia recognized the determination in Elena's voice, the same quiet certainty that had characterized her approach to building the impossible aircraft in the first place. "At least take Reeves as co-pilot. She has extensive winter rescue experience." "Agreed," Elena nodded. "Have her meet me in pre-flight in 10 minutes." The preparation proceeded with efficient precision. Elena changed into the specialized flight suit developed for XF-1 operations while reviewing the latest data from the research station. 3 injured personnel, 1 critical, all located in the main research building, which now had limited power and dwindling medical supplies. The avalanche had destroyed their backup generator and communications array, leaving them with minimal emergency systems and a failing satellite phone. Commander Reeves met Elena in the pre-flight area, already briefed on the mission parameters. "Director Foster, I've reviewed the weather conditions. With all due respect, this exceeds even the XF-1's tested capabilities." "Tested capabilities, yes," Elena agreed, "but not design capabilities. The adaptive systems were engineered for precisely these conditions. We just haven't had the opportunity to verify performance in an actual Category 5 storm. So this is a test flight and a rescue mission simultaneously," Reeves observed. "Every flight that pushes boundaries is both," Elena replied. "That's how we expand what's possible." As they completed the pre-flight checks, Inspector Callahan from the FAA arrived unexpectedly. Over the past months, he had become an unexpected ally, helping navigate the complex regulatory challenges presented by aircraft that could safely operate in conditions previously deemed categorically unsafe. "Director Foster," he acknowledged with a nod, "I've reviewed the mission parameters. Officially, I should inform you that attempting flight in these conditions violates at least 15 separate regulations regarding safe operating environments." "Noted, Inspector," Elena replied, continuing her preparations. "Unofficially," Callahan continued, his voice softening slightly, "those regulations were written for aircraft that obey conventional limitations. The XF-1 has consistently demonstrated that such limitations don't apply to its operational envelope." Elena looked up, surprised by the implicit approval. "I'll be monitoring from control," Callahan added. "The data from this mission will be valuable for our ongoing work to revise regulations for adaptive aircraft systems. Good luck, Director." 23 minutes later, the XF-1 Rescue 3 was airborne, climbing rapidly toward the western mountains and the storm that had defeated all conventional rescue attempts. The aircraft incorporated all the refinements and improvements developed over months of testing, enhanced adaptive systems, more responsive control surfaces, and specialized medical equipment for emergency evacuations. "Control, this is XF-1 Rescue 3, Elena transmitted. "Approaching weather system boundary. Conditions as reported. Activating full adaptive configuration." "Copy Rescue 3, responded the Operations Center. "Be advised, satellite imagery shows intensification in the central storm cell. Wind speeds potentially exceeding 90 knots at your planned approach altitude." "Understood. Adjusting approach vector to utilize terrain shadowing." As the XF-1 entered the outer bands of the storm, Elena felt the familiar responsiveness of the adaptive systems as they continuously reconfigured to maintain stable flight. The aircraft moved with the air currents rather than fighting against them, finding paths of relative stability within the chaotic storm structure. "Remarkable," Commander Reeves commented, monitoring the performance data. "Conventional aircraft would be experiencing severe control issues already, but our stability parameters are still within optimal range." "The key innovation isn't fighting the instability," Elena explained, "making minor adjustments to their course. It's embracing controlled instability as a feature rather than a flaw. The XF-1 doesn't need to be rigid and unchanging to be safe. It adapts continuously to maintain control regardless of external conditions. As they penetrated deeper into the storm, visibility dropped to near zero. Snow and ice particles lashed the windscreen while turbulence increased dramatically. Elena activated the enhanced navigation system, creating a real-time model of their surroundings through a combination of radar, acoustic sensing, and terrain mapping. Approaching final approach corridor, Elena noted. Activating ice mitigation systems and configuring for maximum stability during descent. The final approach to Silverton Research Station presented multiple challenges simultaneously. The station was perched on an exposed ridge, now partially buried in avalanche debris. The only suitable landing zone was a small helipad, dangerously close to unstable snow accumulations. Wind conditions created unpredictable turbulence as air masses were forced around the mountainous terrain. Control, we have visual on the research station, Elena reported. Conditions at landing zone are extreme. Wind shear indicators showing rotational components consistent with mountain wave turbulence. Copy Rescue 3. Be advised, updated medical information indicates Dr. Chen's condition has deteriorated further. Immediate evacuation is critical. Elena studied the approach options, calculating risk factors against the urgency of the situation. A conventional rescue procedure would call for aborting the landing attempt under these conditions. The combination of limited visibility, extreme winds, and unstable terrain created multiple potentially catastrophic hazards. I'm implementing specialized approach pattern alpha, she decided, adjusting the aircraft's configuration to its most adaptive setting. Commander Reeves, please verify all medical systems are prepared for immediate patient transfer. The landing approach that followed would later be analyzed in flight schools around the world as either a masterpiece of precision flying or a calculated risk that defied conventional wisdom, perhaps both simultaneously. Using the terrain features to provide partial shelter from the direct force of the storm, Elena guided the XF-1 through a series of carefully controlled descending turns that maintained maximum stability while bringing them progressively closer to the tiny landing zone. 500 feet to touchdown, Reeves reported, monitoring their descent profile. Wind gusts increasing, 85 knots from the northwest with rotational components. Compensating, Elena acknowledged, feeling the aircraft respond to her inputs with the precision she had designed into its systems. Where a conventional aircraft would have been thrown dangerously off course by the gusting winds, the XF-1's adaptive surfaces continuously reconfigured to maintain their planned approach path. The final descent required absolute concentration and perfect coordination between pilot and aircraft. Elena guided the XF-1 through wind conditions that shifted direction and intensity with each passing second, using the adaptive systems to their full capacity to maintain controlled flight all the way to touchdown. The landing was firm but controlled, the specialized landing gear absorbing the impact as the XF-1 settled onto the snow-covered helipad. Within seconds of shutdown, the research station's remaining staff emerged from the main building, already moving the injured personnel toward the waiting aircraft. Elena and Reeves quickly reconfigured the cabin for medical evacuation while assessing the condition of the patients. Dr. Chen was indeed critical, suffering from internal injuries sustained during the avalanche and now developing complications that required immediate surgical intervention. "How did you reach us?" asked one of the research staff, shouting to be heard over the howling wind. "The National Guard said it was impossible to fly in these conditions." "We specialize in redefining what's possible," Elena replied simply, helping secure Dr. Chen on the medical transport platform. "Now let's get you all to safety before the storm intensifies further." With all three injured researchers secured, Elena completed her abbreviated pre-flight checks and prepared for what would be an equally challenging departure. The storm had intensified during their brief time on the ground, with visibility now reduced to mere feet and wind gusts approaching 100 knots. "Control, this is Rescue 3. Patients secured, preparing for departure. Be advised, conditions have deteriorated beyond original parameters. Implementing emergency departure protocol. Copy Rescue 3. Medical team standing by at Central Hospital. Weather systems tracking shows you'll need to divert southwest to avoid the intensifying central cell." The takeoff that followed demonstrated once again why the XF-1 had revolutionized emergency response aviation. Using the adaptive systems to their maximum capacity, Elena guided the aircraft through a departure profile that would have been suicidal in any conventional design. The XF-1 rose through violently shifting wind patterns, its wings continuously reconfiguring to maintain stability while climbing away from the treacherous mountain terrain. Passing through 5,000 feet, Reeves reported, storm cell intensifying directly ahead. Satellite data shows wind speeds exceeding 110 knots at our planned transit altitude. Elena studied the real-time weather mapping, identifying a narrow corridor that might provide a path through the worst of the storm. Implementing high-turbulence transit configuration, we'll use the mountain wave pattern to assist our passage through the cell boundary. What followed was perhaps the most dramatic demonstration yet of the XF-1's capabilities. Rather than attempting to power through the storm or divert hundreds of miles to avoid it, Elena guided the aircraft through a series of precisely calculated maneuvers that utilized the storm's own energy patterns. Where the powerful updrafts and downdrafts would have overwhelmed conventional aircraft, the XF-1 effectively surfed these air movements, maintaining controlled flight while conserving energy. Reeves seemed momentarily at a loss for words as she monitored their progress through conditions that defied conventional understanding of safe flight operations. I've never seen anything like this. We're moving through Category 5 storm conditions, with stability parameters that would be acceptable for routine passenger operations. The XF-1 doesn't fight nature, Elena explained, making minor adjustments to their course as they navigated through the heart of the storm. It works with it. Most aircraft are designed to impose rigid stability on the air around them. This one is designed to find stability within instability. 43 minutes later, the XF-1 emerged from the storm system, the skies ahead finally clearing as they approached Central Hospital. The journey had taken them through conditions that had defeated every conventional rescue attempt, demonstrating capabilities that expanded the very definition of what aircraft could accomplish in extreme environments. The landing at Central Hospital was almost routine compared to the challenges they had already overcome. As medical teams rushed forward to transfer the patients, particularly the critical Dr. Chen, Elena completed her shutdown procedures with the same methodical precision that characterized everything she did. Director Foster, Commander Reeves said as they watched the medical teams disappear into the emergency department. I've flown combat missions in 3 conflict zones and rescue operations in some of the worst conditions on record. What we just accomplished today wasn't just unprecedented. 6 months ago, I would have said it was flatly impossible. Elena nodded acknowledgement as they walked toward the debriefing area where Rodriguez and Callahan were already waiting. That's the problem with impossible, Commander. Too often it's just shorthand for we haven't figured out how yet. The debriefing was thorough but ultimately celebratory. The rescue mission had not only saved 3 lives, particularly Dr. Chen, whose pioneering climate research had global implications, but had demonstrated capabilities that would transform emergency response operations worldwide. The data from today's flight is extraordinary, Callahan noted, reviewing the performance metrics. The XF-1 maintained controlled flight in conditions that exceed our existing categories for severe weather. We'll need to establish entirely new protocols for assessing operational safety in adaptive aircraft. More importantly, Rodriguez added, we've just expanded the definition of rescuable. There are countless locations and scenarios previously considered beyond reach during severe weather conditions. The XF-1 has essentially eliminated those limitations. As the debriefing concluded, Elena found herself momentarily alone, reviewing the flight data with quiet satisfaction. The aircraft had performed exactly as she had designed it to, not just meeting expectations, but exceeding them in the most challenging conditions imaginable. Director Lawrence from Westridge Academy entered, having apparently monitored the mission remotely. His expression conveyed a mixture of amazement and deep respect. Ms. Foster, he began, then corrected himself. Director Foster, I've been involved in aviation innovation for 30 years. What you accomplished today will quite literally rewrite textbooks. Elena acknowledged the comment with a nod, continuing to review the performance data. But that's not why I'm here, Lawrence continued. I wanted to tell you that the unconventional innovation program you inspired at Westridge just admitted its 15th student who would have been rejected under our old criteria. One of them, Melissa Taylor, whom I believe you've met, has already developed a theoretical model for applying your adaptive principles to spacecraft atmospheric reentry systems. This caught Elena's full attention. Spacecraft applications? I'd be interested to review her work. She'd be honored, Lawrence replied. But my point is this. Your success didn't just change what's possible in aircraft design. It's changing who gets the opportunity to define what's possible in the first place. As Lawrence departed, Elena found herself reflecting on the true significance of what had begun as a solitary project built from rejection and determination. The XF-1 had indeed revolutionized emergency response aviation, saving lives that would have been beyond reach just months earlier. But perhaps more importantly, it had created openings for others who might otherwise have remained excluded from the opportunity to contribute their unique perspectives. 3 days later, Elena stood in the research hospital room where Dr. Chen was recovering from successful surgery. The climate scientist, whose work on predicting extreme weather events had global significance, was already asking when she could return to her research station. "Your team is rebuilding the facility with enhanced avalanche protection," Elena explained. "And we're installing a permanent XF-1 landing pad with specialized guidance systems for all weather approaches. So I could be evacuated again if necessary?" Dr. Chen asked with a small smile. "Ideally, you won't need evacuation," Elena replied. "But yes, with the XF-1, your research station is no longer considered unreachable during extreme weather events." Dr. Chen studied Elena thoughtfully. "You know, my research focuses on predicting events that most models classify as impossible or once-in-a-century occurrences. The data suggests these events are becoming more frequent, but the scientific establishment has been slow to accept findings that contradict established patterns." "Sounds familiar," Elena acknowledged. "Exactly," Chen nodded. "Innovation often happens at the margins, where conventional wisdom is most likely to dismiss possibilities that don't fit established patterns. Your aircraft saved my life precisely because it was designed by someone who refused to accept conventional limitations as absolute barriers." As Elena left the hospital, she found Sophia waiting with news about the next phase of the XF-1 development program. 3 more variants were entering testing, each designed for specialized emergency response scenarios that conventional aircraft couldn't address. "The search and rescue community is completely reimagining their operational parameters based on our demonstrated capabilities," Sophia reported excitedly. "Locations previously classified as unreachable during adverse conditions are being reassessed. The potential impact on survival rates is enormous." Elena nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond professional achievement. What had begun as a personal response to rejection had evolved into something that was literally redefining what was possible, not just in aviation technology, but in human potential itself. As they walked toward the vehicle that would return them to the Rapid Innovation Division facility, Elena noticed a young woman watching them from nearby. She appeared to be in her early 20s, clutching a worn notebook filled with technical drawings that looked strikingly familiar to Elena, reminiscent of her own early designs that had been dismissed as impossible dreams. The young woman approached hesitantly. "Director Foster? My name is Jamie Donovan. I've been following your work with the XF-1. I have some ideas about applying adaptive principles to underwater rescue vehicles that conventional engineering says are impossible, but I thought, maybe impossible just means no one's figured it out yet." Elena studied the young woman's determined expression and recognized something of herself in those eyes. The quiet certainty of someone who refused to accept that current limitations defined future possibilities. "Jamie," Elena responded with a warm smile, "why don't you come with us? I think you'll find we have a different relationship with impossible at the Rapid Innovation Division." As they departed together, Elena reflected on how completely her life had transformed in the span of a single year. She had been banned from flight training, so she built her own aircraft and completed an impossible mission. And in doing so, she hadn't just changed her own future. She had opened doors for countless others who might otherwise have remained excluded from the opportunity to transform what was possible. The true power of innovation, Elena had discovered, wasn't just in solving previously unsolvable problems. It was in demonstrating that the boundaries of possible and impossible weren't fixed and immutable. They were constantly being redrawn by those with the courage to imagine beyond current limitations and the determination to turn those imaginations into reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.